Outsiders. Good morning and welcome to Outsiders. Scott Morrison and the Coalition did not lose government last night. They lost it on November 1st last year, when Scott Morrison stood in front of an adoring crowd of climate cultists in Glasgow and committed Australia to the ridiculous pledge of net zero by 2050. Attacking and resisting climate change alarmism had been the secret winning weapon of the Liberal and National parties at every election since and including the landslide win in 2013. The most pathetic scenes in this election campaign were watching Liberals and Nationals stand impotently as they were attacked on climate change, rather than going on the attack by pointing out the energy crisis in Europe and the war and the spiralling inflation in the US are all the result of climate alarmism. Instead of that, Scott Morrison and the bedwetters within the Liberal Party played along with the pretense that we can close down our coal mines and still maintain our prosperity. Oh, green hydrogen, anyone? You don't win the battle of ideas by surrendering your major winning idea to your opponents. Scott Morrison, through his cowardice on the climate issue and so many other issues, in particular, the abandonment of the nation during COVID to the outrageous human rights abuses of the Labor premiers and the left, and abandoning cultural issues such as religious freedom, has decimated the Liberal Party. If you stand for nothing, you lose. That is the message from this campaign. If you betray your base, you lose. If you follow the siren calls of focus group researchers, you lose. Whether you like or loathe the Teals, the point is they fought from a position of conviction. They stood for something they believe in and they won. It is time for the Liberal Party to rediscover its conservative convictions and stop pandering to the woke, touchy-feely left. Go woke, go broke. As we now know in no uncertain terms, appeasement is a sure path to defeat. Personally, I'm very angry, you may not have noticed. Many of us repeatedly warned Morrison and the Liberals that this would happen. It has played out precisely as I predicted. There is no enthusiasm for Albanese. The Labor vote has gone backwards, apparently. He is a Clayton's Prime Minister, the Prime Minister you get when you don't want any of them. This is what happens when you betray your base, when you shed your party's convictions, principles and values, toss them out the window. Now we are faced with 3 years of hardcore left-wing government that will destroy the fabric of this nation. We will see our living standards crushed, our livelihoods damaged, our cultural institutions devastated, our kids' future prosperity decimated because, despite every warning we gave you, Scott Morrison and the bedwetters betrayed their conservative base, and then they all lost their seats. Talk about instant karma. But there is a silver lining to this cloud. The Liberal Party under Peter Dutton has the chance to be a true conservative mainstream party now that all the bedwetters have gone. Personally, I can't wait for, check my diary, early 2025. Put it in your diary too. Donald Trump will be sworn in as the next US president, or Ron DeSantis, and a few weeks later, Peter Dutton and the Liberals will be swept into power in Australia following 3 disastrous and incompetent years of a Teals-led Labor government where Parliament obsesses over woke identity politics, climate and Indigenous issues as the economy grinds to a halt under their watch. It's going to be a long 3 years. It sure is. But 2025, mark it in your diary. Dutton, Trump, the Liberals will be back. In the meantime, well, James and Rita, what do we make of last night, Rita?
Well, I think it's the loss the Coalition had to have, as you pointed out in your opening editorial. This was always coming. It was necessary, and I think in a lot of ways, Simon Holmes à Court has done the Liberal Party a favour in the long
James said
term.
that last week.
I've been saying it for some time, and I wrote earlier in the week that as much as Josh Frydenberg has been one of the government's better performers and he is a very decent and capable human being, it would have been a disaster if the coalition lost and he held on in Kooyong, because he would be the next leader and the entire party's policy platform would be through the prism of holding on to Kooyong, which has gone green,
which has
teal.
been so
they were going to lose
disastrous.
anyway. The demographics there have fundamentally shifted. So this is an opportunity now for them to realign, to understand that their base is no longer in those affluent inner city seats. Their base is in the suburbs and regions, working class, aspirational Australians who are not born into enormous wealth but care about financial security for their family, have conservative values that Labor have abandoned. Labor is a radically left party, which the coalition did not in any way go after, because they're so compromised by trying to hold on to those handful of inner city seats.
100%,
Now those seats are gone.
100% correct, James.
Well, there's so many more points to tease out of that. One of the things I think we're seeing out of this is it's a huge revolt against the major parties. Everybody said that.
Yep.
It's amazing that the ALP is going to take power when they're going to be on a 32% primary vote versus coalition's 35%. I mean, that tells you a big problem we have with the way that this preferential voting system works.
First past the post, we would have.
But beyond that, though,
Well,
Rowan,
Liberal
you know what
government.
else we're seeing here? This is also about two other things which I don't think people have fully appreciated. Number one, the revenge of the local, okay?
Yep.
Think about it. Daly in Fowler versus Christina Keneally, who we'll talk a lot more about later on.
please.
And we could fill a whole show
Yes,
talking
please.
about her stumbling upwards and failing every single time. So that's, certainly I think probably a lot of people on both sides of the aisle are looking at that as a real silver lining of last night's result. But there's another theme out of this which I think is really interesting, because not only with Daly, but also all the captain's picks of Morrison, many of them hit the wall as well. People want to feel like they've got a local investment in their candidate. A third theme, though, which nobody's talked about yet. Look at where the coalition has had real problems here. Number one, all those teal seats in the very posh areas of New South Wales. Number two, in Victoria, in all the areas where Dan Andrews is still popular. Number three, in WA, where Mark McGowan, of course, is still popular. There is still a big lockdown hangover from this and from COVID, and I think it says something very worrying about our polity and the way our politics is done, that people who are still playing on that sort of pro-lockdown side of the fence and who were associated with that and that whole thing, which is compassion, which is really self-interest dressed up as compassion and kindness and saving lives, they all did very, very well in those areas. I think the politics of COVID is having a long hangover through this election.
Can I just quickly say, Rita, that I totally agree with James there, and we did say here on this show that there would be all sorts of ramifications from COVID, which would have all sorts of surprises in this election. And I think you're 100% correct, James. I think you see that the failure of Morrison and the Liberals to condemn Labor for those lockdowns.
He empowered this.
He empowered them. He gave them power. He ignored his own. I remember at the beginning of COVID speaking to several members of the government who were horrified that they had been cut out of the process and the national cabinet. These Labor premiers were running the show. That, Scott Morrison, was your biggest mistake, along with net zero, and it's come back to bite you hard. It didn't work. None of these pandering. He appeased the premiers. It didn't work. He appeased net zero. It didn't work.
He signed up to net zero. The strategy there was to take this out of app as an election issue, to completely diffuse it. Wrong. It was never.
Rita,
What you diffused was your ability to actually fight an election campaign on cost and reliability, like you did and won in 2019.
Yep.
Now you were absolutely trapped. So, and also with the.
But Rita, you used a word there, and you said strategy. There's no strategy. All this was the entire Morrison second term or first term is a full term has been nothing but tactics, all tactics, no strategy. Just we're going to take this off the board. Oh, we're going to take that off the board. Focus group, focus group. And that's the great irony of this, is that he thought he was being very politically clever in setting up a national cabinet to do what? Take Anthony Albanese off the board during COVID so that he was sidelined, and instead he'd say he's elevate the premiers. Well, how did that work out for you? Now Anthony Albanese is about to be sworn in as the next prime minister. It's all this very tactical, non-strategic, too clever by half stuff, which absolutely did the Morrison government in.
I'm going to show you a photo. I just want to put this photo up on the screen, which someone sent me from Wentworth yesterday. And this is a photo of a car that the Teals had. And on the top of this car, you'll see it in a second, there we go. On the top of this car, there's a bust of, someone spent a bit of money on this thing. There's a bust of Scott Morrison, there's a planet burning up, there's flames, and it's saying he's cooking the planet. And there's a Teal person handing out a thing, or doing something or other. Now, this sums up to me the entire election, because here you had the Teals and the Greens and Labor able to portray the coalition as kind of, they're destroying the planet and all the rest, and not a single member of the coalition could fight this because they'd already agreed. They'd already said, yes, we have to get to net zero. He'd stood in Glasgow and said, yeah, which means he agreed the planet's burning up, which means he agreed that climate change is a major issue. So he gave them on a silver platter the ability to win this election. And it's no surprise that this is what happened.
And it completely negated his ability to point to what's happening in Europe and the UK with prices and energy crisis.
And where they're running away from all of this stuff now.
And who've signed up to this stuff earlier than we did. So they were a few years down the road. And we can look to them and see what happens.
Did you hear it mentioned once by any members of the coalition? No. They could have won the election on that. Sorry.
No. And the big thing here, they missed such an opportunity here, because look at what Britain's doing. They're building a new nuclear plant every year. Now, with the AUKUS deal, they had every chance to say, we are doing a nuclear defense industry, and we're going to have a civilian industry as well. They missed a trick there, and they could have staked out a real point of difference. If you look at this election, on all sorts of issues, it's fascinating. Both sides tacked very close to one another. So the Libs tried to tack very close to Labour on climate, but Anthony Albanese tried to tack very close on things like transport and things like that, and all of that. Housing opened up as an issue, but only in that last week. Too late, because Morrison didn't want a scare campaign run against him, like Work Choices was run against him, against John Howard in 2007. So that was a failure of imagination. And so there was this great issue, nuclear. It was to lay down Mazaire, started at the beginning of the campaign, run it through.
James, I wrote in The Spectator 18 months ago, if the Libs want to win this election, they should do what John Howard did with the GST and turn the nuclear issue into their thing to galvanise people and say, we will give you cheap energy, we will give you manufacturing, we will bring industry back to this country. And you're right, James, that'll allow us to power our nuclear subs. It means we're strong against China. It could have been everything. How dumb were you? I cannot believe it. Scott Morrison, I'm sending you a subscription to The Spectator. Obviously, you don't have one.
And talking about dumb and blind, they, again, barely touched on the chaos under Labor with border protection. And the fact that it's going to happen again, because it always does. And we talked last week about just how awful and ineffective Liberals' ads were. The bloody leaky bucket nonsense, which just irritated you. The Gollum thing, which was just bewildering.
Trippy and weird.
But why not actually show the chaos, the 50,000 boat arrivals, people dying at sea, more than 1,000 men, women and children, our detention centres full, our refugee program completely compromised, and the cost, the human cost, the cost to the country? No, there was absolutely, really, only touching on that. Or, well, Labor aren't really committed to secure borders. No, you've got to demonstrate for the public what happens under Labor. They failed to do that. They failed to fight on their principles and their issues, because they've been running away from their principles and their issues.
And I'm glad you talked about the advertising, Rita, because the advertising was just absolutely non-existent.
Awful.
You look at 2019. Remember the great ads that they had? Bill Shorten, the bill Australia can't afford. That was an excellent ad. But, the bucket ad, the Gollum, the social media game was very, very weak. And, they did a good job, I think, pushing out a lot of good sort of stories about Labor and what Labor would be like. They pushed very hard on the number of criminals that were released from immigration detention by Labor when they were in power, but they never capitalized that with an advertising campaign. And I felt like they were almost running scared from that in the bigger picture. Again, it's almost as if people have forgotten after 10 years what it was like. Well, they're going to get reminded again.
People have forgotten, and people have forgotten that we lost control of our borders, and just about everybody in the media, in the leftist media, said these are push factors, it's not pull factors, there's nothing you can do because unless you can go and solve Afghanistan or solve this crisis in this part of the world. And Tony Abbott showed what an absolute nonsense that was, and that you can claim control of your borders. And this is an issue Australians care deeply about. And Labor has tried to neutralise it by saying we support what the Libs are doing, but they clearly don't. And they're open about not supporting facets of it that are crucial. So without one pillar, the whole thing falls apart. And the Coalition again failed to prosecute that argument. You know what? A Conservative party that has no conservative policies, that has no conservative ideals, deserves to lose. I'm sorry.
I agree with you.
I
agree with you. And look, the Teals came in with the Teals are clearly a party. It's a joke to suggest they're not a party.
I heard something ridiculous today. I'm sorry. I've got to just correct it. I heard someone say many of these Teal ladies or Teal candidates would fit very comfortably in the Liberal Party.
Yeah, well,
what planet
nonsense.
would you have to be on to think that?
We mentioned this last week that there were these rumours going around these sorts of electorates. Oh, this is going to be good for the Liberal Party if we vote in the Teals. Hope you're all pleased with yourself, folks. We did warn you. What a stupid decision that was. What you have is a beautiful bit of slick marketing, beautiful colour, that lovely aqua colour, nice branding, nice simple message. We're going to save the planet. No policies, lots of money behind them. It was a junk food campaign. Now we have 5 of these characters in the Parliament. It's going to be a farce because they don't actually stand for anything other than action on climate change. Action on climate change equals destruction of our economy. So that's what we're going to see,
But
folks.
Can we talk about this, though? The Teals, and the whole thing about them and being comfortable with the Liberals, whatever. But there's another point here. Number one, beyond the slick advertising and everything like that, it became very, very culty in a lot of these suburbs. It was the way that you signal that you're a good person is you have the Allegra Corflute out front of your house, or the Kylie Corflute out front of your house, and that's how you signal you're a good person. The other thing, though, before people on the left start to go, oh, this is a huge resounding victory, the Labor brand is so toxic, you could never have imagined them winning any of these seats. So before anybody starts to think that this is some sort of leftward realignment of the country, no, I think it's just the deep unpopularity of Scott Morrison here, and this does not change the fundamental calculus about Australia being a fundamentally centre-right country.
Absolutely, and you know what the Teals are. They're a new brand of Greens who are interested in green investments. So there are Greens who want to make money for themselves and wealthy investors off the back of working class Australians. Now here's someone who got into her teal outfit a little bit too late. We got this photo here of Christina Keneally dressed in a nice little tee. There she is. Too late, Christina. Nice try. A little bit too late. Now I think we should have a little chat about Christina Keneally.
We can, but just quickly on the Teals, just in case anybody's confused, thinking, well, no, they're essentially Liberals, but just on environment. They're far more. No. You look at their policies when it comes to border protection and refugees, when you look at their policies when it comes to gender issues,
cultural issues,
they would all comfortably fit in the Greens. In fact, I can't think of a single one of them, perhaps with the exception of Allegra, who wouldn't tomorrow be a Green. Perhaps her too, but to me she seems a tad more sensible than many of the others.
It's interesting you said, because I do think one interesting thing that we're going to see here is that rather than the Teals pulling the country to the left, in some ways, especially if it's in a coalition with Labour, they could pull Albo to the right on certain economic issues. They may be the best hope of our keeping our stage 3 tax cuts, because those seats are all about self-interest.
Of course it's self-interest, and this is what I'm saying. They are a different form of Green. They're the Green who's complete...
The wealthy
they're
Green.
not the neo-Marxist Green. They are on cultural issues, but James is right, not on cash. They've got their share portfolios. What they're going to do, unfortunately, to boost those share portfolios, because they stupidly got out of coal, they're going to need to take money from you, the taxpayer, and subsidise renewables, so more windmills, which is just jobs in China. So well done, Teals. We're going to look forward to lots of jobs in China. They'll be sitting there rubbing their hands in Wuhan windmill factory as the orders come pouring in. Mind you, of course, there won't be any windmills anywhere in any Teals constituencies. They'll all be out in the Nationals constituencies out in the country, where people will watch the bats and the eagles get decimated by these things. So that's what the Teals will bring us. Let's just have a quick look at another couple of photos.
Christina. Now, Fowler. They thought even Christina, with her record of failure, could not stuff up Fowler. It was the fourth safest Labor seat in the state.
It was also like 17% or something, yeah.
An enormous margin. You could basically put anybody in there, even Christina, and they'd be elected. No, this campaign showed that. And how funny, James, that you've got a genuine independent here, a local, a refugee, and I didn't see the ABC give her any sort of coverage that all the Teal privileged ladies had.
No, because Dai Li doesn't, look like what the ABC thinks an independent should look like. And
white and rich.
Yeah, white and rich. That's what Christina Keneally looks like. I thought Richo had a great line last night on Sky when he said that she looked like an alien walking around the Fairfield shops in a $2,000 dress. And nobody thought that. Who in Labor thought that this was a great idea? This was always going to fail. And then, you think about all the things that came through in the campaign, her trying to, pass herself off. The best was the story we had when she was piously praying, looking like a Sicilian grandmother in the Catholic Church after spending years begging the Catholic Church for, it's not having women priests and being bad on abortion, according to her. And then, playing all pious. Everybody saw through her act, and they played some really rough and nasty tactics out there, too.
Can we have a look at some of that?
We've got a couple to look at. First of all, let's just look at the man who was caught. I think Miranda Devine tweeted this. This was a bloke who was, to your point, James, furious that a local candidate had been replaced by a blow-in from Scotland Island. Have a look at this bloke who was caught, who was filmed at the polling booth.
Would you like to share your feelings, sir?
For my feelings,
yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Christina Keneally should not be in this electorate. Labor Party, what they have done, and I've been a staunch Labor voter since 1975, what they have done is destroyed democracy in this electorate. Absolutely and totally. And tell Di, I hope she wins.
So, great idea putting Christina in there. Nice work, Albo. If that's the sort of judgment you're going to display over the next 3 years, I can't wait. Now, let's have a look at Christina Keneally's staffer, using very, noble tactics to try and win the election. Have a look.
You're Christina's chief of staff. This is not the Liberal candidate. You got that wrong. So, there's a lot of lies going on here. Very interesting, yeah. That's my wife. She's the independent. You guys even can't tell the locals apart. But when you're from the eastern suburbs, I suppose breathing our air, it's a bit difficult. Shouldn't you be ashamed of yourself to get it so wrong? Do I look ashamed?
So much to look at there, Rita. First of all, you've got a guy who's the husband of the candidate. I couldn't see him, but I'm imagining... he's not an Anglo-Saxon. And here you have this bloke from the eastern suburbs sneering at him, patronising him. Where was the
lying
ABC?
About his wife?
Where was the ABC saying, isn't this bullying? Isn't this harassment? Isn't this racism?
Hang on. No. Not only that, disinformation.
Yes,
Where was the ABC? And also a lot of people in the Nine press who love to crap on about disinformation, which we'll be talking about later on in the document. By the way, stay tuned. Is this the whole big thing that whenever the right lies about anything, they give it the sinister sounding word? Well, they ran an absolute campaign of lies against Dai Li. They put out those pictures of her with Scott Morrison. She was kicked out of the Liberal Party in 2016, Dai Li.
Yeah.
you know, this whole thing has the dirty tactics that they tried to get Christina Keneally over the line. Everybody saw through it. She still didn't win, adding to the great, noble record of failure that is Christina Keneally's campaign.
It really is impressive. Like, if you tried to fail that badly, you probably couldn't. I mean, to lose Fowler is incredible.
If twice as carelessness, you know.
Oh, yes. But,
Ah, yes. Thank you, Oscar Wilde.
Seriously, yeah. There was some ugly stuff during the campaign. Graffiti in Bennelong, we saw. James,
Well, it
you
was
might
an
have
ugly
to...
campaign, wasn't it? I
It was a very ugly campaign.
There was just the hostility, the absolute misogynistic attacks against the Conservative women.
Here, look at
Yep.
so look at this here. I mean, I can sort of describe to you what is being graffitied here. It might be, you know, a bit much for a Sunday morning.
Look at him, bold, in front
But,
of all that traffic.
But just graffitiing Simon Kennedy's posters in Bennelong there, just boldly in the middle of the day, people going by about their business. There were so many cases of attacks, ugly run-ins in a number of seats. In Patterson, in Macquarie, was particularly vicious.
We had a campaign car that was vandalised, I
Down in
believe.
Flinders,
In
with,
Flinders.
again, misogynistic language against the female candidate.
Where was
there.
the ABC?
Yeah, Jacinta
Again.
Price's posters defaced.
With the word fascist. I mean, can you fancy calling a
Jacinta
woman
Price a fascist.
Yeah.
who has devoted her life to fighting for Indigenous women and children, to call her a fascist? Whoever did that, shame on you. You are beneath contempt.
Well, the good news is the revenge. Jacinta Price does appear to have won her Senate seat, which is great. Here's a photo that Warren Mundine sent me yesterday of Warren and Jacinta up there at the in the Northern Territory. Great news to have Jacinta in the Parliament. That'll be the one sensible Indigenous voice in the Parliament, will be Jacinta Price's. But we are going to be, and we'll have to get Jacinta on to talk
Ken
about
White's
this.
lost his seat.
Ken White's
Ken White's
gone. There you go. Go
Bye.
woke, go broke. There you go. We've got a promise of a First Nations, a Canadian term, but anyway, now it's an Australian term, a First Nations ambassador. So Penny Wong has promised us that Albo will introduce, and there was apparently, Rita, they were talking about this last night. I couldn't watch. I switched off by then. They were talking. They were talking about they're going to have a Indigenous ambassador or something or other to trot around the world. That'll be your taxpayers' money funding that. Not quite sure what that ambassador intends to achieve, but no doubt we'll be hearing lots and lots of this.
We are going to have identity politics
Yep.
on steroids. I mean,
Yep.
this. The media saying that, oh, you know, the culture wars, we don't want the culture wars. You're going to have the culture wars
Yes.
as policy
Exactly.
every single day.
Yep.
But of course, the media won't call that out because they'll be on board with it. This is a radically left Labor Party. You might have Albo on the front page of the telly saying, I'm not woke, but you look at their policies,
Well,
you
have a
look
look
at
at
the
this. Here we
obsession
go
with
already. Have a look.
race.
I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. I pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. And on behalf of the Australian Labor Party, I commit to the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full.
Tonight, we can take that step forward to fulfilling the promise of the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
So what we're now going to see is the very same racist policies that are destroying New Zealand now being brought to Australia to destroy Australia. Racist policies that pitch people against each other depending on the colour of their skin, which give special rights and privileges to so-called First Nations people. Exactly what has happened in New Zealand, where it's an absolute disaster. So in the same way that we're going to make all the mistakes that Europe made, that Rita mentioned earlier on energy, we're going to make all the same mistakes under Albanese. We're also going to make all the same mistakes that New Zealand has made under Jacinda Ardern, particularly on this question of race. Now, and here you had in a nutshell. Now, I have no problem with paying respects and acknowledging country and doing all of those things when it is the appropriate moment. But it doesn't have to be mandatory at every single function. Yet there was Scott Morrison last night also getting up to make his concession speech, paying his acknowledgements to First Nations and so on. That's fine, great, do that. But also, please, pay your acknowledgements, Scott Morrison, to all those people whose jobs were lost because You said that there was no mandatory vaccinations and they took you at your word and then they lost their jobs. Where was the respect or acknowledging them? Where was the I pay my respects to those people? Where was paying your respects to the people who are going to lose their jobs because we're going to shut down our coal mines and because we didn't go nuclear? Where is paying the respect to all those people who suffered under police brutality and had their human rights abused during those long lockdowns? Where's the respect to those kids whose education and mental health has suffered because the coalition government did not stand up against the insanity of lockdowns? So there's plenty of people to pay respect to. I'm not saying we shouldn't pay respect to the Indigenous First Nations people, but let's get our priorities right. Peter Dutton, over to you. Rita.
Well, I as a migrant to this country, some of this welcome to country to me is almost a PC way of saying go back to where you came from. It's almost saying you're not as entitled to call this country yours as somebody else.
Yep, that's true.
And frankly, as a migrant to this country, I say get stuffed because this is as much my country and my son's country as any other Australian. So
and I mean, there is underneath all of that and underneath the warm and fuzzy sentiment, there does seem to be among certain sectors an effort to delegitimize modern Australia itself.
It's stolen land. It's stolen land. That's where we're going.
And
you look at the Australian curriculum, you look at what they teach in the schools. And by the way, we need to talk about at some point how so much of what we're seeing flow through politics now is a result of 20 or 30 years of relentless propagandization in the schools, churning out voters who are absolutely terrified and panicked about the climate and actually believe the magical thinking that goes along with so many of the things. It says, I'm voting climate. Well, what does that mean? Do you think? No. I mean, if you're worried about floods and bushfires, then don't pay people and insure them to build on floodplains and let people cut back trees from around their properties. You know, those are what you do about these things. You don't beggar the entire Australian economy, which is what some people want to do.
It's going to be a sharp learning curve for these kids.
The vision you showed there of Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong talking about what they're going to do in power, that was the very first thing they said. It wasn't about climate change. It wasn't about economy and the jobs.
No.
It wasn't about Australia on the international stage. The very first thing they said was concerned with race, identity, politics, division. And this is what it's going to be like for the next 3 years. So strap yourself in. It's going to be an interesting period, but for the coalition, the fight back should start today. And that starts with picking a leader who represents the values, the values that they've lost, really. They've lost sight of.
Well, the fight back actually starts right here, Rita, on Outsiders, and it will every Sunday morning. We will not hold back. And the fight back starts. Matt Canavan is in the studio shortly. Catherine Deves is in the studio shortly. And we'll have Alex Antic. So the fight back begins here on Outsiders, and it will be unrelenting, I promise you. Coming up, Rita has her weekly reality check and more fallout from the election results.
Welcome back to Outsiders with your hosts Rowan Dean and James Morrow and me, Rita Panahi. And soon we'll be chatting to Matt Canavan for a different kind of post-election analysis. But first, let's check in with the leader of the free world who has just arrived in South Korea. And he's acting as rationally and lucidly as you'd expect. Here he is walking down the steps of Air Force One. And for some reason, he's opting to wear a mask outdoors with no one else near him. But wait for it, as soon as he reaches people and gets close enough to shake their hands, the mask comes off. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I'd dearly love to have the science behind that explained to me in detail, please. But if you're worried that the president is just too dazed and confused to be leading the free world, then take comfort in the fact that his Veep is ready and capable and is already tackling the really big issues like school buses.
So I think about this subject of our yellow school buses in that regard. Because think about it, yellow school buses are our nation's largest form of mass transit. How about that? Every day. So yes, and let's applaud because it gets them where they need to go.
Okay, but despite the mad cackling there was actually a deeper point the Veep was trying to make. She seems to think the existence of these school buses threatens the health of children and the planet.
If your child rides the bus half an hour to school and half an hour back every day from the first day of kindergarten to high school graduation, they will experience the equivalent of 90 full days of exposure to diesel exhaust. And these fumes do not just threaten the health of our children, they also threaten the future of our planet. Diesel exhaust is a greenhouse gas.
So 1 minute she's laughing madly about school buses, and literally the next minute she is telling her bewildered audience that the buses are killing the children and the earth. I'll have an extended version of White House wackery tomorrow night at 9 p.m. on the Rita Panahi Show. But before we bring in Senator Matt Canavan, let's consider the advice the Coalition is receiving right now from the left-dominated Australian media, who of course will tell them to lurch further to the left to win back power. Because that's worked so well for state Liberals in WA and South Australia and Victoria. The centre-right should never take advice from people who vehemently dislike and misunderstand the centre-right. The Liberal Party in Australia only thrives when it stands true to its conservative principles of meritocracy, small government and individual liberty. Tony Abbott, who the media labelled as unelectable, won in a landslide. And someone like Peter Dutton could do the same. But just watch that same media label him unelectable. In recent years, the Liberals lost sight of their ideals and became a Labor-light party, implementing policies from the left like net zero, spending like drunken sailors, and abandoning the so-called culture wars, which are actually hugely consequential issues that shape a nation's values. From free speech to identity politics, the Liberals abandoned the field in the culture wars and allowed the left to pursue its agenda despite the Coalition being in power. Watch now as Labor implement radical policies to further advance the left's march through the institutions. Woke ideology, including toxic race obsessions and trans madness, are as entrenched in Labor as budget deficits. But the bedwetters within the Liberals prevented the party from capitalising on these fault lines. As I said some weeks ago, Simon Holmes à Court and his Climate 200 Teals may in the long term be doing the Liberals and the country a massive favour by helping to rid them of their wets and their obsession with a handful of formerly blue ribbon seats. The Liberal Party has been compromised by its efforts to hold on to this handful of affluent inner city seats and has ignored the masses in the suburbs and regions who are ripe for the picking given Labor's ideological shift. That's where the Liberals' base is now, not in the wealthiest suburbs, but among the working class, among aspirational Australians who are socially conservative and no longer identify with modern Labor's often radical policy positions. These are people who weren't born into wealth, but they work hard to create financial security for their families. These are people who care about energy costs more than emission targets. They care about their children being properly educated rather than indoctrinated in school. They love their country. They're not embarrassed by it, like so many privileged and self-loading Greens and Teals. That's the Liberals' new base. And the sooner they realise it, the sooner they will be back in office.
Great stuff, Rita, and absolutely correct. And joining us now is Senator Matt Canavan. Matt, great to see you. Congratulations. Still in the Senate, still there, fighting hard, and a great night for the Nationals.
Well, there's a lot to fight for, Rowan, and it was a disappointing night, but I've woken up with a positive step because we've got to fight back here, and I'll be doing that in the Senate. You're right, the Nationals Party held every seat. It's a remarkable record. We have not lost a seat for 15 years. In fact, we picked up a seat over that period. I can't find another lengthy period of a political party in government doing that. But I agree completely with what Rita said. We unfortunately have lost last night because we have forgotten the forgotten people. We forgot the quiet Australians. The electorate hasn't changed all that much in 3 years, but we did in the last 3 years. We adopted a Liberal moderate platform on energy, on climate, on the culture issues. And that platform has failed. It's failed again. It failed in WA, it failed in South Australia, and it's failed nationally because, surprise, surprise, when you take a pale imitation of Labor's policies to an election, people go for the real deal.
Exactly.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
McDonald's can't sell health food, and we're not going to be able to sell socialist policies. That's
Well,
not
so
what's going to be the path to victory.
So let's assume that Peter Dutton is the next leader. I said last week on this show that Peter Dutton and Matt Canavan should be the leaders of the opposition if you went into opposition, but that's a different
Well,
question.
Barnaby's done an excellent job. I mean, he's held all his seats.
Good.
I
So-
hope he stays around. It's up to him, but I hope
Peter
he sticks around.
Dutton and the Nats together, what can you do? And do the Nats, because you've done better than the Libs, do you get a larger slice of the cake and what's going ahead?
Well, look, that's not my key consideration right now. I do feel for those Liberal members who have lost their seats, and that we are in a weaker position now because of that, and it's an uphill battle to get back. But as I say, I've woken up with a positive step of frame of mind here, and to all your viewers out there, the key thing now is to join the party, get involved, because if you don't, all of these lefties out in the media today will get their way, and they'll continue to take the party down a surrender monkey approach, which will not get us back to government. And even if it did, we'd just be a Labor government anyway in name, and we'd only be Liberal in name only. So join the party, get involved, and put some spine back into our political forces, because the way back here is to get behind an agenda which is about low taxes, lower red tape, the family. We don't talk about the family anymore. We need to get back to that. That's what a core thing of what we should be about is providing an environment to protect and allow families to thrive. There is a deep hunger out there in the electorate for such an agenda, because the reason there was so much disengagement in this campaign is the biggest issue for people is balancing their budgets around the kitchen table, and neither side of politics really had a coherent response about how they're going to do that. You watch the media the next week will be obsessed about climate change. They'll be totally obsessed by it. And people out there around their kitchen tables going, what the hell is going on with this country? I can't afford to pay for a tank of petrol right now.
Exactly. James?
Matt, did the coalition miss a real opportunity? Did Scott Morrison miss a real opportunity to put nuclear on the table at this election, or before this election, when you did AUKUS, to say we're going to have a nuclear defence industry, we should have a nuclear civilian capability? That's how we get to net zero, not this, we'll do net zero too, just a little bit later.
Well, look, on the latter point first, I mean, our problem was we effectively legitimised the green agenda.
Totally.
Because we signed up to the destination. I mean, you can... we were arguing that the timing needs to change, but effectively we're saying we should get to this net zero uplands just a little bit later. But if it's so good, why wouldn't we get there sooner? So it was completely incoherent. And look, on the nuclear question, I mean, we can all play Monday experts now. But the core issue, I thought, is we unfortunately lapsed into making this a personality contest because we didn't put policy ideas on the table.
But that would have been
nuclear would have been an option.
James,
Nuclear would have been an option. But look, there's lots of options. But we did not take a suite of policies to this election. We tried to make it about Albo, and 12 months ago that might have worked. But personality politics is very fickle, and I think a little bit unfairly. I don't think Scott Morrison really did anything to deserve the vitriol that was unleashed on him. But that's politics. It happened very quickly, and we were on the wrong end of that.
But you're saying Monday morning experts, but lots of us were talking about nuclear long ago. So it's not. This is not a new thing.
I get that.
But Barnaby Joyce committed to net zero. Whether you agree or not, I suspect you were not happy with that decision.
You think?
Barnaby Joyce gave that reason as being because you've got to be in government to make changes. You're in government for 6 months under that. I don't see anything that came out of that. Now you're in opposition. So what should the Nats be doing differently? Should a Dutton-led coalition be abandoning net zero?
Well, I think so, Rowan. I mean, I was against it, and what Barnaby did was let the party room decide, which is the right thing. There wasn't really a proper debate about net zero in the joint party room or in the Liberal party room, which I think was a failing. But we did have that debate in the Nationals party room, and the majority did agree, although that was done under the context that the coalition would be blown up unless we agreed to net zero. So there was a bit of a threat there. But look, I think we do need to reconsider these things. I mean, we are going down a path here in the Western world where we're seeing higher food prices, higher energy prices directly as a result of net zero, or if you like, ESG policies. And as I often say, ESG, it stands for extreme shortages guaranteed. And that's what it is. And that's what we're seeing. And what we should get back to is supporting policies. I mean, net zero is a label. We should support policies that seek to have energy abundance in this country so we can dominate on energy, we can have surpluses of energy, we can have lower prices, we can have cheaper food prices. And so families can actually survive in our country, and we can have a lot of wealth and jobs as well. They're the policies we should adopt and put Australia first in those discussions, not be led by the global agreements and whatever the current elite thinking is overseas.
Is Peter Dutton your next leader?
Well, look, that's a matter for the Liberal Party. I'm not in the Liberal Party.
Is your next leader?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's...
That's a yes. We'll take it as a yes.
Yeah, look, I think that's probably... Look, I hope so. I hope he decides
Now,
to
Matt,
do
just
it.
very quickly, you're a great man with the acronyms. You've got an acronym for this new government. Tell it.
Well, look, the other thing here tonight is let's keep in mind, as I say, I've woken up with a positive frame of mind because this Labor government that's been elected has been elected on the lowest primary vote the Labor Party has ever received since 1910.
Yeah.
Right, so they're going into government,
Yeah,
and
so
they've been elected.
Clayton's
now
Labor
they're going
government.
to be beholden to the Teals, to the left, in the Senate to the Greens. So it's going to be a Labor, Green, Bant, Teal government, and LGBT government.
On that note.
And you go woke, you go broke. So let's just sit back and get the
Yeah,
popcorn
wrong
out.
and you go broke.
Matt Canavan, thanks so much. Thanks for coming on. Great to keep you there in the Parliament, and we hope to see lots more of you on Outsiders, because Outsiders, Matt, is where the fight back is going to happen.
Yeah.
And we're going to fight back. After the break, Biden has a new press secretary, and she's doing about as good a job as he is. In a tick. Welcome back.
The president's Twitter account posted the other day, "You want to bring down inflation, let's make sure the wealthiest corporations pay their fair share." How does raising taxes on corporations reduce inflation?
So it's very important that as we're seeing costs rise, as we're talking about how to build a America that's safe, that's equal for everyone and doesn't leave everyone behind. That is an important part of that as well.
That, of course, is the new White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. She's replaced Jen Psaki. So we'll get on to her in a second. But first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching us this morning. We want to see you here every Sunday morning, because this is where we start the fight to get Peter Dutton and a Conservative, Liberal, national government back in within 3 years. We can do it. You can do it. It will happen. And thank you so much for watching. Now, let's talk about this newly appointed White House Press Secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre. She's the official spokeswoman for President Joe Biden. Like her boss, she struggles to answer a question coherently.
As we jump.
The president's Twitter account posted the other day, "You want to bring down inflation, let's make sure the wealthiest corporations pay their fair share." How does raising taxes on corporations reduce inflation?
So it's very important that as we're seeing costs rise, as we're talking about how to build a America that's safe, that's equal for everyone and doesn't leave everyone behind. That is an important part of that as well.
And again, like Biden, you wonder at times whether she's lost the plot completely.
But how does raising taxes on corporations lower the cost of gas, the cost of a used car, the cost of food for everyday Americans?
So look, I think we encourage those who have done very well, right, especially those who care about climate change, to support a fair tax code.
Well, that makes no sense at all. Fighting inflation by caring about climate change.
Oh, maybe we'll do that here.
Yeah, well, look at Australia. But it is unhinged, and just reflect. This administration is responsible for overseeing the world's largest economy. Now, if what you just saw doesn't scare you, then I don't think anything will.
It's pretty ugly. There it is, 1129. That's not where you want to be at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The NASDAQ was looking even worse. The S&P, no pretty picture either.
Nothing has changed on how we see the stock market. That's not something that we keep an eye on every day.
Sorry, you don't keep an eye on the stock market every day. I'm sorry. Is the presidency a part-time job? So if the economy is not in your, top 5 priorities? Well, I wonder what is.
Down and out, the Homeland Security's Disinformation Board is now paused. The would-be Minister of Truth, Nina Jankowicz, handed in her resignation letter, which was obtained by the Associated Press.
We can realize that she has repeatedly made statements that are utterly untrue, complete disinformation. You mentioned a couple of them. The Russia hoax that turned out to be absolutely nothing. The Hunter Biden laptop story, which she claimed was a Russian plant. Now even the New York Times and the Washington Post have to admit that it's real, that it really has happened that way.
Biden's Orwellian-inspired Disinformation Governance Board, which lasted all of 3 weeks, is no more. For some reason, people didn't take to big government deciding it would be the arbiter of truth and putting a leftist conspiracy theorist in charge of it. How are you going to spin this one, Corinne?
So if it's pausing because you think the board was mischaracterized, then the disinformation board is being shut down because of disinformation? Is that what's happening here?
Look, I mean, the board was put forth for a purpose, right? To make sure that we really did address what was happening across the country when it came to disinformation.
And it's okay now, 75 days.
It's just it's going to pause. There's been a mischaracterizations from outside forces.
Mischaracterization from outside forces, otherwise known as the facts. KJP unfortunately has what's politely referred to as NFI, no effing idea. That could have something to do with her thinking that this job was all about...
I am obviously acutely aware that my presence at this podium represents a few firsts. I am a Black, gay, immigrant woman, the first of all 3 of those to hold this position. This is a historic moment, and it's not lost on me. I understand how important it is for so many people out there.
Me. Why are you picking on me, everyone? And why this division when we should stand united?
And we must reject hatred and extremism ideologies that seek to divide Americans whenever we find it in our society.
This white guy and his privilege came on stage. Racism, sexism, misogyny, all of that, homophobia, xenophobia, we connected to Donald Trump. Racism, the slavery, Jim Crow, this country's original sin. We have to uproot systemic racism. Talk about one of this country's first original sins, the racism, systemic racism.
We also have to figure out as well how systemic racism deals in every part, every way.
Start the process, because it's going to take some time to uproot systemic racism. We have to continue to call out this racism. We cannot stop.
Looks like the chickens have well and truly come home to roost. Well, it's Wackademia, the wacky world of academia. Wow, I can't wait to see what exciting Wackademia we're going to have over the next 3 years in Australia as who's going to be the Education Secretary? Do we know? They never told us, did they? Any thoughts?
No, but I'm pretty excited by Foreign Affairs and Defence already.
Well,
I haven't even bothered
if we're having a First Nations ambassador, why not have a First Nations Education Secretary? And we could all learn.
Well, it could actually.
We don't really need one.
Tanya Plibersek, because she was, I think, education in the old Gillard Rudd days, wasn't
Well,
she?
you know what? Let's be honest. Are we going to actually notice a change? Because what we've seen, the coalition before this election had won 7 of the last 9 outright, and yet
we still get all
we have
this
had the mad
stuff.
left march through academia.
Speaking of which, here's one: the removal of sonnets that are too white and Western, James.
Well, in fact, it's not just those few sonnets, it's actually all sonnets. So at the University of Salford in England, outside Manchester, teaching the sonnet is no longer a thing that they're going to do because, that's a patriarchal form and it's colonial. A sonnet is colonial. So if I say, shall I compare thee to a summer's day or anything like that, apparently I'm being racist and patriarchal and all sorts of things like that. So one more classical form by the wayside of wokeness.
Well, I also want to mention this has happened in Australia, Rita. The parents of a school, I think it's in Adelaide, are outraged after the school has removed toilet doors. Why have they removed toilet doors from their kids' toilets? Well, it's non-gendered facilities.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Wait, what?
That's really great.
How does that make sense?
Yes,
Well,
so the parents are up in arms, and I don't blame them.
Transparency in toilets, I guess. I mean, it's just mad. Nobody, I would suggest even boys would appreciate that. I mean, surely everyone wants just a tad of bit of privacy when you go into the bathroom.
Not exactly safe schools. Anyway, plenty more Outsiders coming up right after the break in a tick. You're watching Outsiders, and in the studio in a couple of minutes, Catherine Deves is here and she's got a lot to say. Do not go away. But first, I want to take you through a story that occurred last week in the run-up to the election. Last Sunday, just a few hours after Outsiders, someone alerted me to this week's World Health Assembly in Geneva, in which 194 nations will be taking the next steps towards a global pandemic treaty. You'll remember, of course, that it was here on Outsiders back in 2017 that I alerted you to the Global Compact on Migration. And thanks partly to the attention we drew to that insidious project, Peter Dutton stepped up and Australia did not sign it. What you have to realise, first and foremost, is that all global treaties ultimately, to some degree or another, for better or worse, diminish our national sovereignty, bit by bit, transferring control of our rights to international bureaucrats. We've seen this occur on everything from human rights legislation to, of course, net zero, where Scott Morrison told us that international investors mean we have no choice other than to hop onto that particular global bandwagon. That's a classic example of the Python squeeze or ratcheting approach global bodies use, incrementally introducing this or that rule or piece of legislation that a country willingly signs up to, but it then turns out you can't back out of it. So, for argument's sake, what might a global pandemic treaty look like?
Now the World Health Organization is going to be able to determine, they are going to decide when our respective nations face a public health emergency. So they get to decide when we are dealing with a new pandemic, and they also later will get to decide through this new treaty that we talked about last week, how we need to respond to them.
So that's the nub of it. Ultimately, the World Health Organization seeks the power to unilaterally declare a pandemic and at the extreme end, take whatever action it deems necessary to control that pandemic. Anyway, I was sufficiently concerned that I raised the matter on Paul Murray last Monday. I did this because it struck me, as I've been saying for months, that if the Liberals wanted to win, they should attack Labor as being the party of lockdowns and the destroyer of our personal freedoms. As I said on Paul Murray, why doesn't Scott Morrison come out and challenge Labor to not sign the pandemic treaty? Too late now. Instead, on Tuesday, this unfortunate exchange occurred.
The World Health Organization meets on May 22, and on the agenda is a potential pandemic treaty which would allow WHO to direct countries in how they control pandemics. Would you consider signing up to that and handing over any controls to the organisation?
I have always been supportive right from the outset and was criticised heavily, I stress, heavily, mocked in fact by the Labor Party for saying that WHO should have those powers and those authorities to be able to go and deal with pandemic situations, because we all know what happened at the start of this pandemic. The problem is we don't know what happened at the start of this pandemic, and I was the one calling to ensure that we had an independent process to understand what happened so it couldn't be repeated. So I have been in the vanguard of those moves internationally to ensure that there is greater protection for world health, to ensure that those World Health authorities can come and understand what's going on and be able to assist countries to be able to prevent the spread and outbreak of major infectious diseases.
Yes, but sorry, former Prime Minister, that was not what the question was actually about, but about, quote, the WHO, the World Health Organization, directing countries, ours included, in how to control pandemics that they declare. And Mr Morrison gave his firm support for that process or that idea. Big mistake. Meanwhile, Alexandra Marshall, my editor at The Spectator Australia's Flat White online magazine, wrote a searing piece in which she brilliantly wrote, having acquired a taste for globalised control during the COVID pandemic, the World Health Organization wants to create a global pandemic treaty in Geneva. Scott Morrison, who attempted to escape criticism by saying there's no such thing as vaccine mandates, is champing at the bit to grant the WHO absolute control over the health choices of Australian citizens. Well, that's what Alexandra wrote. Woohoo, zut alors, the merde certainly hit the ventilateur, as they say in Geneva. Alexandra's piece, appropriately for a global pandemic article, went viral, with lefties and lovies going into meltdown, accusing the story of being a right-wing scare campaign. Well, faster than you can say Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Scott Morrison rushed off to 2GB's Jim Wilson, where he insisted the Spectator story was rubbish.
No, it's complete rubbish, and we would never sign anything like that. I would never sign anything like that. That is not something the Australian government would do, and it's complete and utter rubbish.
Well, you won't get the opportunity to sign it or not to sign it now. But anyway, what exactly was Scott Morrison saying was rubbish? That there is a conference in Geneva next week to discuss amendments to the international health regulations? Well, there is. Was it rubbish that Australia will be in attendance? I'm pretty certain we will be, particularly now that Anthony let's all get vaccinated and boosted as fast as we can Albanese as Prime Minister. Rubbish that we will be agreeing to the amendments? Well, I guess we shall see. Rubbish that the amendments don't permit the WHO to not seek the agreement of member states in declaring a health emergency? Well, they do. Rubbish that the WHO is planning a global pandemic treaty? They are. Anyway, as I wrote in The Spectator, the pandemic and its aftermath have taught us one invaluable lesson. Too much power in the hands of unelected officials and unaccountable bureaucrats only results in bad, even deadly decision-making. Indeed, it led directly to this.
What's this? Ultrasound in an hour.
Yeah, she's pregnant.
Your head. Your what the are you doing? What the are you doing?
Now, and okay, they're shooting. They're now shooting. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
So what's the bottom line here? The AAP fact checker says, and I quote, the claim that proposed amendments to the international health regulations would allow the WHO to unilaterally enforce lockdowns and remove sovereignty from governments is false, experts say. While the amendments are designed to strengthen the WHO's ability to detect and declare health emergencies, they do not give it the power to force lockdowns within sovereign nations. But with respect, again, that's not the point. The fear always was that next week's meeting is just the next stepping stone along the line in clearing hurdles to the end point in 2024. Under an Albanese government, when a global pandemic treaty is scheduled to be finalised and signed and implemented. And now that we have a Labor government, they will undeniably sign us up for it. Indeed, the AAP fact checkers, if you go down, readily admit that the World Health Organization is also in the process of drafting a new pandemic response treaty, which is due to be submitted by the 77th World Health Assembly in 2024. The World Health Organization is doing that, and guess who will be signing it? I think we know. The AAP fact checkers also say that Article 12 amendments remove the requirements for the WHO Director General to receive the agreement of the state in which an outbreak is occurring before determining a health emergency. So there you have it. The story was not rubbish. Yet again, a genuine Conservative Liberal government would have fought this outrage rather than going along with it. The Morrison government only has itself to blame for not fighting for the values of mainstream Australia. That's just one example. Personally, I remain convinced that we are faced with two very clear choices. We either go along with the increasing drip demands of globalist organisations that keep seeking new ways, step by step, to legally allow unelected bureaucrats to exert power over us through coercion or even sanctions, such as with human rights, net zero and so on, or we stand up and fight for democracy, for freedom and for national sovereignty over and above international obligations. This is the greatest challenge facing us, even more so now that we have a Labor government who will be totally in hock to the globalist climate cult of the Greens and the Teals. I'm delighted to have in the studio with us the best candidate the Liberals put forward at this election, Katherine Deves. Katherine, great to see you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Rowan. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, you didn't win. What a joke. Australia supports 93%, at least 80%, probably higher, of people support your organisation or the idea of your organisation saving our girls' sports or saving women's sports. You should have been front and centre of this campaign. It would have been a different result had you been, but they stifled you, they silenced you. What on earth was it like?
Oh, look, my campaign was fighting a battle on a number of fronts. We were fighting in the Warringah Conference, we were fighting headquarters, we were fighting the lefty-lovey press, and then we had to go out there and fight the Teals. So considering where we started and where we got to, I'm incredibly proud of my volunteers and where we got to last night.
Well, you were frustrated in fighting the Teals. I mean, you should have been focused fully on fighting Zali Steggall, not internal battles and people undermining you, from Matt Keane to Sharma to these wets who seem to tolerate everything except a diversity of views within their own party.
That's right. So I think that this demonstrates that what the factions do to a party. Obviously, there's going to be a bit of a bloodletting, but at a federal level, the moderates have been eviscerated, and the Liberal Party needs to get back to its traditional values.
But they haven't learned. James, just quickly, let's just watch Simon Birmingham. He hasn't learned the lesson. Let's have a look.
The way she had framed those issues, I suspect, was not fully appreciated when she was selected, and that clearly became a dominant feature of the campaign, throwing us off message, but more significantly than the throwing us off message is the point that I made very early.
Periodically over the course of the campaign.
And is the point I made early in the night.
So do you think she should have been disendorsed?
Well, it would have been far preferable if she'd not been endorsed in the first place.
Should she have been disendorsed?
In hindsight, yes.
What a pompous git you are, Simon Birmingham. I'm sorry.
Hello.
But hang on.
Katherine, sorry, James.
But as a proof of concept, though, of what you were talking about, and this idea that your sort of values, sensible, common sense values, versus these sort of moderate left squishy values, look around. You had a 4.7 swing against you, according to the current count. North Sydney, Trent Zimmerman, 13% swing against him.
Yes.
In McKellar, Jason Falinski, 16.4% swing against him with Sophie Scamps. Now, to me, that says that the moderates, nobody's buying what they're selling anymore.
Yep.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think I started an argument and with respect to this brand of feminism that is predicated on victimhood. We have these people prosecuting this argument about feminism, and there are only worthy victims. They get to choose who the worthy victims are. And if you go against their prevailing dogma, then they will metaphorically burn you at the stake, and then they'll resurrect you, and then they'll burn you at the stake again. And I think with me getting out there and pointing out that there are issues with this so-called modern feminism where they can't even identify what a woman is, I think the ordinary Australian people resonated with that, and that is why I had so much support around the country and internationally.
And do you think that this now, because the New South Wales state government has been so dominated by people like Matt Keane and others who are essentially holding Dom Perrottet hostage, do you think that all of this is actually going to bode poorly for them next year when they go to an election?
Look, if there's going to be a reckoning at federal level, which obviously there is, I would not be surprised if it happens at the state level. But I think that the Liberal Party needs to get back to its Liberal values, and maybe this has started that.
Now, will you run again? Will you stay and fight?
I would like to say to my detractors that when they thought I could not withstand the storm, that I am the storm. And I am not going anywhere.
You heard it here on Outsiders. Here she is, the great Katherine Deves. I still maintain, as I said right at the beginning, that if you'd been put front and centre of this campaign, if the Liberals had done what, weirdly, Dominic Perrottet and Scott Morrison seemed to instinctively know, to allow you to prosecute the argument as to why girls and women's sports are under threat and the steps needed to rectify that. Had you been front and centre every day on the television, we wanted you here every week on Outsiders, and the Liberals would not let you even appear on Outsiders. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that, what I am saying is common sense, but they are afraid of the lefty-loving press. They are afraid of the Twitterati. But ordinary Australians back me in that position. They do not like having words like mother and breastfeeding stripped from law and policy. Australians do not like seeing sex removed from law and policy. But it seems like our leaders are just afraid of the left press and the Twitterati.
Now, Catherine, you introduced me to someone who's actually Rita's old school friend, weirdly, which is Jasmine Sussex. Now, you and I spoke to her, and it's a documentary we've got coming up shortly here on Sky. We spoke to her, and she lost her job. She was forced out of a breastfeeding organisation where she'd been a volunteer for 17 years. And you stood up and spoke very passionately about this. Because she wanted to use the word mother to describe mothers.
Oh, that's exactly right. This woke nonsense that's creeping its way into all our institutions, and our politicians, bureaucrats, the media sitting there saying there is not a problem, there's nothing to see here. That is not true. There are women who are losing their jobs. They're being dragged through disciplinary processes. They're being threatened with litigation. People are afraid to speak up at work. This is happening.
And you personally copped just the most horrendous treatment from a lot of female journalists, I've got to say. Vicious, unfair, completely unbalanced, all masquerading as news when it was really opinion. You've got an insight now into why Conservative women don't put up their hand to run for office, because this is what they cop. It's not just the feral abuse from members of the public who may not agree with them, it's the media.
Yeah, the media get to decide who the worthy victims are. This victimhood feminism, and if you don't fit into their prevailing paradigm, then, as I said, they will muckrake. They will go through your life. Your children will be threatened. I'm aware of women who've had their livelihoods threatened. As we said, they've lost their jobs. Why would ordinary people stand up for common sense when that is the price that they have to pay?
Catherine, I won't go too much into the personal side of things, but you and I spoke a few weeks ago, and you were clearly traumatised by the attacks that were coming your way. How strong have you had to be? What effect has this had on your family? And as Rita says, can you ask other women to step forward?
Well, courage lends to courage. So hopefully by standing up myself, other women will feel empowered to follow in my footsteps. But of course that takes a toll. And as I've said, there were some very dark moments, but I had wonderful people around me who picked me up, who told me, encouraged me to keep going. And I couldn't back down to these bullies. If I did, they would have won. I wanted to make my daughters proud. I wanted to stand up for the people of Australia who are asking me to keep going, to please speak for me because I cannot speak for myself.
And we were inundated with people supporting Catherine Deves. I know James and Rita had the same thing, emails saying, Catherine Deves, we support her, we are behind her, we admire you for your bravery. Well done, you fought a terrific campaign. As James has pointed out, it's a victory as far as we're concerned, because all the bedwetters got smashed, but you did a lot better. You did a lot better in that seat there in Warringah. And next time, you'll be back. You'll be back in the Peter Dutton-led government, which we're going to fight for every Sunday here on Outsiders. And Catherine's going to be joining us as often as she can. Catherine Deves, thanks so much.
Thank you, Outsiders. Thank you for your support.
Anytime. Well, it's time to wheel out the wind turbines for Warringah. Let's just go to a break and start.
What are you advocating for? My God!
It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound kosher by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origins are like
Stop! Enough! Stop! I can't take it anymore. Sorry about that, folks. I know a lot of you had a long night, so let me apologize on behalf of Rowan and Rita for playing that clip, but at least it wasn't the hole in the budget ad, right? God, there's a hole in... Oh, never mind. Anyway, enough of that. But there is a reason why I did play that. And before we get back to talking about the elections, let me tell you about it. Now, if you were watching the show a couple of weeks ago, you might recall that old Scary Poppins over there, also known by her real name, Nina Jankowicz, was Joe Biden's pick to be the United States' new disinformation czar. I know, right? From First Amendment to official government narrative police in just 230 years. Well, big news. The office of the chief censor is no more, at least for the moment. Now, according to a report by Taylor Lorenz, a 30-something perpetually outraged journalist for the Washington Post, whose previous claim to fame was outing the anonymous citizen behind the brilliant Libs of TikTok Twitter account, the Biden administration is pulling the pin. Now, here's where it all gets super ironic. Lorenz, in her story, blamed, quote, far-right influencers, oh God, for pushing a fear campaign around the disinformation czar, which is a bit silly because her musical numbers are frankly scary enough. But it's also telling because to explain away the failure of the Biden administration to get up its anti-disinformation organization, they clearly relied on the Washington Post to spread some more disinformation. Now, Lorenz claims that Jankowicz, quote, has been subject to an unrelenting barrage of harassment and abuse while unchecked misrepresentations of her work continue to go viral. Oh, please. Yet the Washington Post, supposedly the ne plus ultra of journalism, doesn't back this up. As Stephen L. Miller wrote in the Washington Examiner this week, who coordinated these supposed brilliant online attacks against Jankowicz that forced Senate Democrats to cancel a hearing with her and pushed the Biden administration to cancel her entire gig? We also don't know that because Lorenz does not elaborate or back up that claim with evidence. Something you would think would be quite important for a newspaper such as the Washington Post. Who knew? Anyway, it doesn't take a genius to see what is really happening. The momentum in the culture wars, at least in the US, are finally starting to go onto the side of common sense. Other news from around the traps this week, Netflix, once one of the premier pipelines for pumping woke sewage into the culture, has recently seen its share price tank. And after being mocked for a series about a man getting pregnant, has forced its employees to sign a statement that they cannot complain if, God forbid, they're forced to work on a Dave Chappelle show. They've even had to cancel 2 Ibrahim X. Kendi animated shows. God, can you imagine that? They'd be even worse than that hole in the bucket ad, including a show called Anti-Racist Baby. Because yes, even your baby is a racist who needs re-education. Meanwhile, the aforementioned Dave Chappelle is still outperforming after being attacked on stage, and Joe Rogan, remember all the confected controversy around him a few months ago? Still churning it out with 12.3 million subscribers and counting. Now, last week we talked about that salami strategy and the way the left keeps slicing away at the culture just a little bit at a time until they have us all believe it's perfectly reasonable to say 2 + 2 is 5 because, who knows, arithmetic is racist or something. But the corollary to all this is that it is possible to fight back, and the best weapon is mockery. I mean, who couldn't laugh at this?
It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. When Rudy Giuliani shared bad intel from Ukraine, or when TikTok influencers say COVID can cause pain, they're laundering disinfo, and we really should take note and not support their lies with our wallet, voice, or vote.
Oh God.
Sorry about that, guys.
James, we have to have a chat later on.
Awful.
Joining us now is Liberal Senator for South Australia, Alex Antic. Alex, great to see you. How are you?
I was all right up until then. Thanks, Brian.
Blame James. Now, Alex.
I've watched that on Twitter many times. I don't ever want to see it again. Thank you.
Okay, Alex, want to get your thoughts on the election. The fight begins here on Outsiders every Sunday morning to bring a Peter Dutton-led Conservative Liberal government into Liberal Nationals government into Australia in 2025. How can we do it, Alex?
Well, by doing what you're doing, I think. We have to thank you for all the work you do speaking for us deplorables. It's much appreciated. Look, I think that'll play out over time. We've got to finish the Senate count first up, apart from anything else, in order to get a party room. We still don't know all of those questions, and that may not happen for weeks on end. But look, I think that Peter would be a very strong choice, a very good choice, and a very likely choice from where I would sit. So let's see what happens.
Rita?
Well, what is your analysis of what's happened in this election? We've seen the affluent seats turn teal, the moderates have been decimated. Does the party go further left to try to win back those moderate seats?
Look, well, I'm sure there'll be those inside the four walls that'll be trying to pitch that message. And I have to say, I heard the comments of Senator Simon Birmingham last night on ABC Radio suggesting somehow that the views of Catherine Deebs were a form of contagion that had spread throughout the electorate. And I have to say, I've never heard more nonsense in my life. That is just completely and utterly wrong. And the reality here is that this is a centre-right Conservative party. It was only 3 years ago that the Quiet Australians rubber stamped that for us and showed it. Since then, I'm sad to say, and I've been saying it probably to the irritation of many inside those very four walls, but we are not the party of capitulation to net zero. We should not be the party of vaccine mandates, although I accept they weren't a Commonwealth issue, but across the country, Liberal state governments like mine here effectively endorse those. We are the party of individual choice, freedom of speech and so forth. We've all heard those hackneyed lines a million times before, but the time is now to understand that the Liberal Party's experiment with the poison of leftism and progressivism must be over. It's as simple as that. We've got to get on with the job. And look, I'd be very hopeful that that would be the case. I think we've seen the writing on the wall there. I mean, and it is sad, all of the people that have lost their seats were, in many cases, people that were trying to, appease the climate crowd. And look what happens. We've all talked about it before. You throw the left and the climate crowd a bone, and then they just use it to crack you on the head with later on. That's exactly what's happened.
Exactly, James.
But also, how much of what happened, certainly in places like New South Wales, had to do with the way the party was dealing with things like pre-selections? I mean, the Libs came in, especially in New South Wales, severely handicapped by the fact that it was fighting in court over who its nominees were going to be. Within days of Scott Morrison calling the election. What does the party have to do to get its act together in terms of party democracy? One thing we've seen here is that local always tends to have a big benefit. We see that with Dai Lee. What lessons can the Liberals learn from those things beyond the whole, moderate this or conservative that?
Yeah, look, I think you've summed it up really well. This is a showpiece, I think, for what good local members and good local representation will do. I mean, if you look at my friend and colleague Tony Passon down in Barker, he has been a strong advocate for his community, but his values have remained sound. The combination of hard work and good values and local engagement delivered a great result. He might even have the safest seat in the country now as a result of that. I think he's only lost 1% or 2% or very little. And we see that rolling out time and time again. We even saw that in the state election here in South Australia. Those that were good local candidates that were listening to their constituents are getting elected. And can I say this as well? The other thing I want to see from the party is a drift away from the political swamp. We have too many political staffers that become politicians in this party. I'm not one of them, but this has become an elite club. The membership have got to speak. We need Conservative members to come back to the Liberal Party. Join us. They can get in touch with me, alex@believeinblue.com.au. If anyone out there wants to join the revolution, I never thought I'd be a revolutionary. And here I am, Che Guevara, in my own kitchen. How about that? But that is what needs to happen. It's a grassroots political organisation, and we need to get that back.
But isn't it mad, Alex, that you're revolutionary for wanting to bring a centre-right party back to the centre-right? But you know what the analysis from the media pundits is overwhelmingly going to be. They're going to say you need to go more small L Liberal, go further left, or the centre as they call it, to become electable. How's the party machinery going to stand up against that overwhelming narrative from the media and from some inside the party?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the first thing to do that is to switch the fake news antenna off. That's the first thing. Look, I think that the truth here is that we have to say, this has gone back generations. We've talked about this before on your show about the long march through the institutions. Much of the blame for the teal revolution in this country has to lay firmly in the lap of Conservatives of the last 2 decades, not shooting down this nonsense about climate change, allowing school children to go to sleep upset because they think the world is coming to an end.
Yep.
That has given rope to these teal candidates where there should never be. It's like the parent that says to the child, you can't eat chocolate all day, every day, and they kick and scream and wail. Well, sometimes you've got to be a tough parent. You've got to tell it like it is. So we've got to get stronger on this nonsense. We've got to push back on these globalist forces that are coming through, and climate change is one of them. The World Health Organization and their treaty is another one. And not be frightened to call out. We've got to drown out the Guardians, the ABCs, because we didn't do it when we were in power. We're going to have to do it when we're in opposition.
Now, Alex, I'm delighted to say it looks like you will have as a colleague Jacinta Price, who is one of the genuine, wonderful voices of Indigenous Australia. How can you and Jacinta and others, how will you be able to, tackle the incoming First Nations ambassadors, First Nations education secretaries, the whole kind of Jacinda Ardern style racism? How can you tackle that?
By telling the truth, Rowan. That's all we ever need to do in politics. It shouldn't matter whether we're in opposition or in government. We must always tell the truth. And if that means getting a few noses out of joint, Catherine Deves has shown you can do that. I will say this, though. The issue for people like Jacinta, and she's a very strong person, by the way, and as is Catherine, but the slings and arrows do seem to come to women of the right over and above women of the left, so that she will cop that. She'll be very ready for it. But the selective sisterhood of the left will come for her. We'll be there to support her with that. That's a great message. She's going to have that fight every day in the chamber, I suspect, and she's the voice of reason and common sense, and I welcome it.
And Alex, one final thing. I hope you're going to be wearing that teal-coloured shirt to Parliament. I think we admire the sense of humour. Perfect, mate.
This is anyone would tell you this is turquoise, not teal.
Excellent. Thank goodness for that. I'm colourblind as well as deaf. There you go.
I'm sorry.
Thanks, Alex Antic. Good luck in the Senate, and we'll see you lots and lots of times here on Outsiders in the next 3 years as we fight to get a Peter Dutton Liberal National Government in 2025. Thanks, Alex Antic.
Looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Coming up, it's getting colder. Frosty reception out there for some candidates. Must be Ice Age Watch. Hello and welcome to Outsiders Weather and the Skeptics Ice Age Watch, the show that uses the popular scientific methods of skepticism laced with a healthy dose of well-meaning cynicism, wrapped in a sweet layer of sarcasm and topped with a sprinkling of good-natured humour to challenge the more extremist claims of the climate change catastrophists and global warming gurus. Indeed, you didn't have to look too far this weekend if you were seeking the faintest indications of an impending ice age. All you had to do was wind down your window on the way to those teal polling booths. It was freezing. There you go. Indeed, here's climate change activist Simon Holmes à Court getting a particularly frosty reception at a polling booth in Hawthorn.
Why? Just leave me alone, Simon. Please leave me alone. If you're suing me for defamation, Simon, I don't want to talk to you. Simon, you are suing me for defamation. Please leave me alone. The matters may have legal implications. Please leave me alone, Simon. You are the son of Australia's first billionaire. You are suing me for defamation. Please leave me alone. Leave me alone.
Hey, Josh, how you doing?
I agree with everything she says.
You agree with her lies? Would you like to repeat her lies?
Speaking of chilly receptions, according to Electroverse, Seattle just experienced its coldest May 12th on record. And now a powerful Arctic front is heading into Colorado, plunging Denver temperatures into the low 30s and high 40s Fahrenheit and into the low 30s over the weekend, challenging long-standing May records. Snow will hit the mountains first before expanding south and east and dropping its elevation. For areas below 6,000 feet, including the Denver metro area, heavy rain is forecast to shift to settling snow on Friday. The higher impact snow will accumulate in the foothills, where astonishingly a winter storm watch is in effect, covering Friday and Saturday for areas above 6,000 feet. Indeed, with only less than a fortnight till the northern summer begins, and it's still snowing in the Arapahoe Basin, much to the delight of eager skiers. Over in Hungary, according to Zdeněk Nejedlý, they recorded a daily minimum temperature record of minus 1.2 degrees Celsius at Zabar, beating the record set in 1952 in Fugőd. Now it's time for our weekly bit of cherry picking. No, not that sort of cherry picking. This sort of cherry picking. This is where I show you a graph that I have specifically cherry picked to show you just one highly selective piece of data. In this case, it's the satellite data from the University of Alabama. Now pay attention, because although the chart from 2000 to the present day suggests a gradual warming trend over that period, when I cherry-pick you just the segment from 2015 to today, voila! It shows the global warming trend has been weakening since 2015. Make of that what you will, Teals voters. And that leads us to our climate joke of the week.
These candidates are not working in cahoots. These candidates speak for themselves. They are truly independent and we have no influence in what they will do in the next, immediately following election.
You're watching Outsiders with Rita Panahi, with James Morrow and myself, Rowan Dean. And just checking, guys, have any of you got monkeypox? Monkeypox. It's the new great scary disease. I'm sure you read about it over the weekend. Everyone get terrified. It's monkeypox time. Now, what exactly is monkeypox?
It doesn't sound fun.
It doesn't sound fun. It sounds pretty bad news. It sounds pretty good. Scare the kiddies witless with monkeypox. That's what I say.
How do you get it?
Hey, what a coincidence. We've got how lucky we've got a global World Health Assembly this week to discuss pandemics and
wonderful.
monkeypox. That's
Rowan, is anybody here to explain to us what monkeypox is?
We've got Dr. Kerry Chant. She'll explain to us how do you get monkeypox? Kerry, please tell us.
The infection is usually a mild illness for most people, and most people recover in a few weeks, but some people can experience more serious illness. You are infectious whilst you're unwell, and that extends whilst the lesions are open. So cases of monkeypox have recently been confirmed in Europe and North America, and this includes the UK, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Belgium, the US and Canada. A large proportion of the cases detected overseas are amongst gay, bisexual or men who have sex with men. And we're particularly urging men who are gay, bisexual or men who have sex with men to be aware of any unusual rashes or lesions and to contact by phone the sexual health clinic or GP without delay if they have any concerns. It is important to be particularly vigilant if you've returned from overseas from large parties or
Oh my God.
So let's break this down. I want Rita or James to explain to me, because I'm not very bright, and I'm particularly on these sorts of topics, I get very, very lost. Can you please explain to me, from a linguistic point of view, I'm interested in, what is the difference between men who are gay, men who are bisexual, and men who have sex with men?
Don't all three have sex with men?
Well, why didn't she just say men who have sex with men?
No, because I think Kerry Chant, being very PC and very woke as she is, was very, very careful not to misgender women or those born with female bodies. Gosh, I don't want to be taken off air in this new Albanese regime, who identify as men even though they have female anatomy and have sex with men, but they are having sex with men as men even though they've got female bodies.
I'm still confused, I'm sorry. But let's just to cheer ourselves... No, I mean, sorry, let's to terrify ourselves, let's have a look at the photo of what these blisters look like.
Don't do that.
Okay, that's fine.
See open lesions.
It's terrifying. This is the point. It's terrifying. You see, the problem with COVID, it wasn't scary enough.
No, but you see, the thing is, Rowan, I don't know. I mean,
visually
it's like
scary disease. Why didn't she just come out and say, if you don't want to catch the thing, don't go hanging around in gay male orgies?
Well, I'm sorry, Rowan.
Well,
you know what's scary to me. You know what's scary to me.
Say that, because if you want to go to a gay male orgy, you should be able to go to a gay male orgy. But I think from what she said there, the symptoms are mild for most people. And, you know, I just don't think it's something that requires the Chief Health Officer to be giving press conferences.
17-minute press conference with Brad Hazard standing behind her.
Well, this is the thing. And I mean, it's like, you know, you want to talk scary. I'm a lot more scared when they break the glass on the Kerry Chant case and wheel her out to start talking about a mild illness than I am about some monkeypox thing, which doesn't sound like it's a lot of fun. But it also sounds like it's... It sounds like you really have to, put a bit of effort into getting this one. It's not like your COVID, which you could just sort of be, hanging around. And I don't know where we're going to have to wear our masks next.
Well,
for this thing,
Rita identified the problem. And the problem which I've been trying to highlight is that identity politics and this sort of language actually gets in the way of people being able to communicate simply and clearly who's at risk, who's not at risk, what measures you should take, what precautions you should take, etc. Said we've got 17 minutes of identity politics garbage where you have all this tortured language, and this is what is happening. This is what is happening. We're going to see so much of it over the next 3 years, Rita.
We saw that throughout the pandemic. Yeah. We've had 18 months, 2 years, where we knew right from the start, because we interviewed a doctor working in the front lines in New York City telling us that obesity is an enormous risk factor. Just about everyone she was treating in intensive care with COVID was obese. And yet, because of fat shaming and body image issues, this enormous risk factor barely got mentioned in the media by doctors, and 80% of people who were hospitalised in America with COVID were obese.
But let's take
just let me say, yes, you're talking about Dr. Quanta Ahmed, who will be on Outsiders next Sunday.
Excellent.
She'll be here, and she was telling us Rita is right, 2 years before it. You heard it here on Outsiders, as is always the case, by the way.
But there's another thing too, and this is what we were saying at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, was these people, once they taste power, they're not going to give it up. So it may not be monkeypox, but the point is, and I spoke about this Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben a couple of years ago, the guy who predicted basically the rise of a biomedical state where the need for the state to keep you healthy and safe trumps your right to freedom and liberty. And that is what's happening here. And, we've seen this before even the pandemic with all the health nanny state stuff. You win the war on smoking and then they move on to what you're going to eat and drink. You win the war on coronavirus and then they're going to find something else. They will never give up interfering in your lives, and this is where the real pushback has to be.
And let me just quickly say, Dr. Kerry Chant even has an expression for what James is talking about. Let's have a listen.
We will be looking at what contact tracing looks like in the New World Order.
But I tell you, what's next isn't going to just be viruses. It will be the health impact of climate change. So you're bringing 100%. And we've already had the Victorian Chief Health Officer, before COVID came along, he was writing papers about the health impacts of climate change.
Climate lockdowns.
So that's and the policy will no longer be something to debate the merits of. It's a matter of health and
you know
safety.
What it is, Rita? It's not going to be whether you have to wear a mask on the plane. It's whether you're allowed to fly in the first place.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, let's have a little bit of hyperbole. We're just as good as a salad bowl, Rita, you and I. We're just as good. So hyperbole, here's this this intrigued me, Rita and James, because this seems to be, I've heard this mindset before, which is that, once all you Conservatives all die out, then it'll be a nirvana of left-wingers. Have a listen to this Abby, whoever she is, telling us her thoughts. This is the millennial mindset. Have a listen.
In the next 10 or 15 years, as people who are voting for the Liberal Party literally die out and also metaphorically die out in the way they're thinking and how the world will progress and how the earth will either decline or progress, I really do think that eventually our two-party system will be the Greens, which will be the left, and then Labor, which will be kind of more like how we see the Liberal Party now. Just washing face thoughts. Because I just feel there are so few people who are young and educated who are voting Liberal. If you're voting Liberal and you're my age, genuinely, there's something genuinely wrong. You're either uneducated or have no empathy.
There you go. So that's the millennial mindset. Let's have two parties, Labor and the Greens.
She really sounded educated and intelligent there, didn't she? I mean,
I lost IQ points. I lost IQ points watching that. I mean, what does she want? The Bolsheviks and Mensheviks fighting it out? Come on.
That is just hilarious because the lack of self-awareness that you could sound so thoroughly thick and awful and then talk about empathy and talk about intelligence. I mean, are you kidding me? I don't know who she is, but my God, can we have a segment with her every week? Because I think anyone watching, if you're having a bad day...
She's AOC.
Hey. No, she is not. Please, AOC's at least achieved something. Whoever she is, I think we have her on every week, and people watching will feel better about themselves watching that.
But there's this very sinister side to this.
It's going to boost everyone's self-esteem. This is what we're here for.
Well, there's a sinister side to this, which we can go into in more detail next week.
Of course it's sinister. It's bloody evil.
It's this death cult idea, that, let's just... People who don't agree with us politically, let them just die, let them just go, and then we'll live in this nirvana.
The same people who wanted lockdowns to say these people. We have to shut down society so nobody over 90 dies, but then, they're dying out.
There you go.
Make up your mind.
That's all for this week's show. We will see you next Sunday at 9 a.m. Tune in to Paul Murray for a 2-hour election wrap-up special where he'll continue the fight back. Up now is Ross Greenwood with Business Weekend. Thanks so much for watching Outsiders. We're fighting every single Sunday morning till we get a Peter Dutton government. See you then.